The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseware continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseware at ocw.mit.edu.
So today we're doing charcoal making, and we'll talk a bunch about charcoal making on Friday, but hopefully you read the directions for making it, so you're at least a little familiar. And so one of the things that's complicated in charcoal making is the order of operations, because there's steps that you need to do to make briquettes that if you want to be most conservative with your energy, you need to do while you're doing the next carbonization burn. And this is something to keep in mind if you are making charcoal in Nicaragua. Like if you are doing a demo, you need to have charcoal to make briquettes, and you also need to be able to do a burn. So you actually need to have done a burn ahead of time in order to make the briquettes with people as well as doing the charcoal burn. Because it's a two-step process. One is lighting your raw material on fire and making it into charcoal fines. And then the other step is crushing the charcoal and mixing it with a binder and making it into briquettes. But some of those processes can be parallel. So the first thing that we actually need to do is prepare the cassava for, which is our binder, which is used to keep the briquettes together. So this is what cassava looks like. It's also known as yucca or manioc. I think in Nicaragua it's mostly known as yucca. Yucca, thank you. So this is what you look for. It's generally not waxed when you buy it outside the United States, but other than that, it looks exactly like this. It's sort of like a sweet potato in that like it comes much skinnier and shorter than this, and it comes like much bigger too. So you can find it in all sort of varieties. It doesn't really matter what you use. Like bigger diameter is nicer because you have more meat to skin ratio and you have to peel the skin. But other than that, it doesn't matter what you get. But you should be able to get it at any supermarket in Nicaragua. And smaller markets sometimes, depending. So if you guys want to start grading this and then peeling it and then grading it, the peels can go in this bag and then the graded stuff can go in this thing. If you don't have a grater with you, which you may not, a spoon works really well to grate. It's not as nice as a peeler, but you can use it to peel, and you can find spoons pretty well anywhere. In terms of graters, this is probably what you're used to seeing, and you want to use the side, the pointy side. This is one I bought in Nicaragua. This is one we bought in Haiti. So you're going to be able to find them anywhere. They're probably not going to be like OXO brand stuff, but you'll be able to find them. So if some set of people wants us to get started doing that. So the other stuff we're doing is making the charcoal. They're making the charcoal fines. So you can see that this oil drum has a hole cut out of the top, and about this big is nice so that there's enough edge of the top of the drum so that when you put a lid down, you don't have to be careful to make it line up to really cover it well, but big enough that you can load the material in well. On the back side, you just put in a few holes. We often put in more holes than just this many, so I would recommend that. Like if I were doing this drum today, I would add one here and here and here. The holes are for airflow, and more holes is better. On the flip side, this is getting to be pretty big in terms of diameter of hole because you don't want your waste to all fall out the bottom. One thing you can do to manage that, which is in here, is you can buy this stuff, which is called chicken wire, and just throw it in the bottom to prevent the waste from falling out. However, you need to have some waste that comes out these holes. At the bottom, you'll see that we use fuses to light the drum. So it's sort of this weird catch-22 where you need it not to fall out, except you kind of do. So we're not actually going to use this today because the waste isn't that fine. The other thing that you can use chicken wire for, well, there's two other things, but one is if you're trying to carbonize waste that's pretty small in diameter, and hopefully you won't be because we don't do it well yet with our current processes, but if you're going to carbonize like rice husks or sawdust or something like that, the method we've come up with is to take the chicken wire and roll it into cylinders that are about the same diameter as these holes, put them in the holes, and the waste goes around those holes but not in it to help get airflow. So that's another thing we use chicken wire for. And then there's a third that I'll show you in a bit. So the way you make these holes, if you have an angle grinder, sweet, you probably won't. So you can use a hammer and a chisel and sometimes just a nail to get the hole started. It's really laborious, painful to do. If you can find someone who you're working with who's used to using a chisel and used to doing metal work, they'll do a much better job than you will, for at least for most of us who aren't used to using chisels on metal most days. So you don't be afraid to ask for help. And then when you're finishing the holes, you just, like down here, you just want to try to bend them in as much as possible. If you can get a pliers or something similar to bend it so that no one gets cut when you're working with all of this stuff. It's really easy to get cut, and it's a kind of nasty cut in a dirty environment, so it's nice not to have that. So what we're going to do now with that awesome warning that makes you really excited is to load the raw material in the drum. And what we're going to try to do is put layers of the corn stalks, which is in the blue tarp, and then the corn cobs, which is in the green mesh bag. So if you guys want to start doing that. Typically, you would take, if you remember to bring one on your trip, which you rarely do in my experience, you would use one of these to weigh out how much material you were using. In this case, we're not going to bother with that because we're just doing a practice burn and it's cold and I'm trying to speed things along. But generally, for waste, you're trying to get about 16 kilograms into the drum, which is a lot. So you kind of have to pack it down. One of my friends likes to stand on the top of the drum and sort of sink in when he does it. But you definitely want to pack it in pretty well. So if you guys want to get going and start loading the drum. One thing I forgot to mention, and it's super easy to forget, is to put a stick of any sort down the center of the drum so that the material, so there's a chimney in the center to really help the material light on fire. It's two things to know. Number one, it's really easy to forget, so try really hard not to. There are like instructions that you'll have that go through each step, and just make sure to go through them. The other thing is, we've asked community partners, like, do you have a long stick? And they've gone out and bought like a $50 really nice piece of wood for stuff, when all we need is like any random piece of wood, metal, you name it, will work. And so just emphasizing, like, this isn't fancy. And then as you're loading, you want to sort of pull the stick around to keep making that chimney.
Don't think too far, man. That would be unfortunate. Yeah.
We have done crazy things like that.
It's only 4 cents.
Okay, so now what you do is you get 3 generally rocks, but around here it's actually easier to get bricks than rocks. So we use bricks on campus, and you want to lift the drum onto the bricks or rocks. And the thing is, once this drum is hot and on fire, we're gonna have to lift it off the bricks. And so you want the bricks as far on the edge as possible of the drum to make it really easy to kick the bricks out of the way. So if 2 people want to lift the drum onto the bricks and then sort of optimize brick placement.
Good. Yeah.
So I would pull like that brick out farther. I can't see the other one. And then you just sort of pull around to optimize your chimney and then pull this out. So now we're ready to light it on fire.
Yay!
Except, so that would be what I would do back before I've done this a million times and realized my mistake. So I said we needed to boil some water on here for the binder, right? So if we need to get that ready before we light it on fire. So it's always important before you actually light the matches to make sure you're completely and truly ready. Both in terms of having water on the side so that if there is some sort of uncontrollable fire, you can put it out quickly. Having all the stuff you need to cover up the drum when you're done, having a plan for how you're going to do that. So we're going to go through all of that first. But one thing we're going to do is boil water for the binder. Okay. So the way we're going to do that is there's going to be 2 people. So Kurt, you can help me demonstrate maybe? You can just put it down. Maybe a little farther away from the tripod. So we don't. All right, so we each take one side. Sometimes you can wire it if you're worried, and then we lift it up, and then you bring it over. And ideally, you'd have a. The one thing I'm worried about this one is that I think the diameter does not work at all. So yeah, so can we put it on the side? Can you lift it up? Lift it up, and then if it goes there, will it stay? Yeah, but it has a curved bottom, so I think we'll go with that. Because it's going to be really hard to take out. So yeah, and then do it back. So Kurt, you've just gotten practice, so I want 2 other people, one from Grupo and one from also ProStar to practice it, and then you guys will be the one who actually do it. But it's actually worth practicing before you light it on fire, because if you drop the cold water, you just destroy the burn if you drop it in the raw material. But if you drop the boiling water, you can scald people, including yourselves, which is highly unideal. So yeah, so it's worth practicing. Yeah, it might be the worst chosen pot ever, so hopefully you will have more success with pot choosing. And then if you can actually move this quite a bit farther away, like to the edge of the bricks, this drum is going to be really hot, so you won't want to be near it for too long. All right, so we're ready for water boiling. The other thing I said we need to be ready for is covering up the drum, because you kind of want to do that relatively quickly. And the process is one that's easy to misremember what order to do it in, especially for me, because we changed the order a lot as we optimized it. So, okay. So first what you do is you get the lid on, which just involves doing that. And then if it didn't quite get in the right spot, you can sort of use this to get it in the right spot. The other thing you want to do is notice if the lid is kind of convex or concave. We're trying to make a seal, so it's better to have, I mean, it doesn't matter a lot, but whichever way fits a little better. So I think that this way fits a little better maybe. And then we're going to take it off the bricks. So for that, what you do is you find, like, you do it at the brick, so you lean the drum over and then someone comes and kicks it. And then you very, very carefully lower this drum down, because now it's at a bit of angle, and then you repeat. There's a shovel around here that you can also use. Sometimes it's nice to have 2 people manipulating the drum just for a little bit of extra safety. And then once it's all the way down on the ground, then we will find something to cover up this hole, anything that's around, and then pour sand around the edges on the top and on the bottom, and just work as quickly as possible to get it completely sealed so you can't see any smoke seeping out anywhere. Are there any questions about all this? All right, so the one last thing to know is, especially when it's windy, which it often is in Nicaragua too, it's a really pain in the butt to use matches to light this. But we're gonna, because it's good to practice that. Yeah?
Where does the water come in? The boiling water? That's first. We light it and then boil the water and then seal it? No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's not like a 10-second process, so it'll be plenty of time to get the water when it's time. So if 5 people want to all grab matches and try to start lighting it, hopefully we'll have success. So did you guys everyone with a match should know you're lighting the bottom at the fuses. Okay, so you guys can start.
I don't think.
Yes.
I think it's funny if it gets there now.
You want to go that side so neither of us?
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay, good idea.
Thanks.
Wait, hold on. Are we putting water in now?
No. So what's happening?
It's fine.
So right now you're seeing this incredibly nasty, disgusting smoke, right? And so this is all the volatiles in the raw material that we don't want to be breathing in when you're cooking inside, burning off. So you can see like there actually isn't any fire up at the top when the wind blows it. The material hasn't actually lit on fire completely. So it might not be a bad idea if we can do it to light some matches and throw them in the top to try to get the top side on fire. We're not going to be boiling the water until the smoke blows away. So it blows away. At some point, the smoke will transition to clear, and when that happens, that's when we'll do the water. And this is smoke that you really don't want to be breathing in, if it's not obvious by the color.
But it like the smoke.
I'm pretty sure they're all blowing out.
Yeah, if it's too hard, just don't worry about it because it's not worth.
You can see flames now, actually, I think. It looks like they're flames.
You want to do it with this one too?
So the other thing to know is that by Cambridge Mass law, we have to, if we're going to be lighting a fire, we have to be cooking. So there are marshmallows and English muffins. Once the smoke clears, feel free to roast a marshmallow on whatever you can find, or toast an English muffin. And then there's Nutella to put on the English muffins. So at this point, we can probably do the water. So. What'd you say? Yeah. It's just like it's nice to use the waste heat. Nice. The question of how long to wait until you cover the drum is always tricky. At this point, it's probably a good time to cover it, which the water isn't boiled, but we're just going to go with that. So if you guys want to take the water off. And then who wants to throw the lid on? Okay.
Is it hot? Careful.
Yep.
Hold on, you need this thing.
No, fine.
Oops. So can someone grab the shovel? So the lid is getting caught into the hole. Okay, and now who's gonna kick the brick?
I will.
Okay. And who wants to do the next brick? Okay, can someone grab like an English muffin or whatever to put in that center hole? Yeah.
I think an English muffin is way cooler. We can claim that we're cooking.
Yes.
No. Need it anyway.
And then there's a whole other bag of sand if you guys want to help get this sealed.
I'm pretty sure it's still gonna be warm, and we can get even closer now.
Yeah, but it's not as warm enough to get the fire.
But when you're close to the circle of the space, it's just don't want to look.
And you can obviously use dirt for this. You don't have to use special sand that you acquire.
So what was the rationale for calling like we should put the lid on?
For when I made the call. So the flames, so it's sort of a time thing and sort of a experience thing, but it's looking at how the quality of the flame, and the flame started to be getting really strong, which means everything is fully on fire, and if you don't cover it up quickly, you're just going to burn out all your material. No, so this is all smoke. This lid is actually really hard to seal. In terms of getting a lid, oftentimes you can just buy flat pot lids, and that works pretty well. So when you're buying a pot, if you need a pot, if your community partner needs you to buy a pot, you can also be buying a pot lid that goes over your drum, just big diameter. I think that's water actually boiling off. We try to seal it as much as possible, but it's impossible to do it like perfectly. So that's that, and now you just wait 2 hours, and then you come back, and the material should be carbonized. And if you are impatient and you open it after an hour, it'll probably catch back on fire, so then you have to just cover it up again really quickly. So it's currently almost 1, so that means we'll be able to wait almost 2 hours and then open it up before class is over, which is great. So next, what I want to do is light these stoves on fire so we can make hot chocolate, and then we'll make briquettes. When you're making just a regular charcoal fire in a developing country, you can typically get a special type of wood. I forget what it's called in Nicaragua. I'll try to look it up. Do you know? Is it ocote? That's what I was remembering this morning, but then I was like, oh, I think that's something else. Okay, so it's called ocote, and it's basically, from my understanding, is just a pine that's really sappy. And this is sort of the equivalent of that in the U.S. And so you light those on fire, and they help the briquettes, the charcoal, catch on fire. This is wood charcoal that I just bought from Whole Foods, because our charcoal is so labor intensive that it pains me to make it or use it up for something like this. So if you guys want to try to light those on fire now.
So to just like light it like
Yeah, so those 3 brown things are what you're trying to get lit. So these are 2 different stoves that we'll be talking about on Friday. So the one that Sid and Missy are lighting right now is just a really simple, relatively simple charcoal stove. I forget what country it's from, but you can find them all over the place. And so it has very little insulation, obviously. The one that Kurt and, is that Juan? Are lighting is called a Gico stove, and we'll talk about it a bit, but it's a much, it's a well-designed stove. It actually has some decent insulation.
That wood is what they use as the match.
Maybe.
Like, so that just has a lot of sapping.
it just, the way they're designed to work is like this on top.
It's just like getting black.
It's getting gray. That's disgusting. What the fuck? But it's like cold. I just put it on.
It doesn't have much air.
Why does it smell yellow?
What do you mean?
It's definitely like very marshmallowy and the rest of it though.
So after the carbonization is done, the next step is to take all the charcoal fines out and crush them. And so this is actually mostly crushed, and it's sort of this mishmash of stuff. But there's some good examples in here. So you'll see some stuff that's just dark brown but not actually black. And this you should toss because it's not fully carbonized enough, and so it'll make really bad smoky briquettes. Similar, like this corn cob is not fully briquetted or carbonized. With regular corn cobs, one thing to check, you know, if they look black on the outside, is break them apart and make sure they're black on the inside. When you look in the drum, you're going to see three things. You're going to see, hopefully, majority is black material like this, except not in the crushed form that you see down below. Some that'll be that brown stuff that's undercarbonized, and some that'll be gray and ashy that's overcarbonized. And so if you have a ton of gray ash, that means you let the fire go too long. You should have covered it up earlier. If you have a ton that's on the brown side, you didn't let it go far enough. If you have mostly black with a little bit of each, that's a good indicator that you had a good burn. You're never going to get perfect 100% all even because this is not exactly a high-tech kiln, and so you're not going to get even temperature flow throughout the whole thing. Some of the things on the form that you fill out when you do a charcoal burn, which I haven't been doing because it's too hard to talk and remember to fill this out, are things like air temperature and humidity, which you probably won't have a sensor for that, but if you happen to know, you can record it, and otherwise by recording the location we can look it up afterwards. So just fill all these things out as well as you can, but there are probably going to be some things you can't recall, but especially if you bring any charcoal back for testing in the lab, it's really helpful to have filled these out. And then there's one side that's like the form, and then the other side has the directions, both what you need and then what to do. So hopefully that's enough to get you successfully making charcoal. So anyway, so to crush the briquettes, or the fines into powder, what we typically do is load it into 2 rice bags, and rice bags are pretty ubiquitous. You can get them almost anywhere, and then you just jump on the bags. When you're done, you get a mixture that kind of looks like this, where you have a lot of stuff that's really well crushed, and then hopefully you have a lot of that, and then some stuff that was poorly crushed. And so what you need to do is grab the stuff that was poorly crushed and crush it. The super crushed fine stuff sort of acts as a sponge to dampen the act of crushing everything else, so it's pretty annoying. So there is not enough ag waste in the world to solve the needs of fuel usage in the world. However, there is enough to have it be one part of the solution, and then different areas will have different amounts of ag waste. So places that have no farming, obviously you're not going to have any ag waste and it's inappropriate. Places where there are farming, some people use their ag waste either to feed their cattle or to replenish the soil or to light the fires to process the sugar juice that they dispose of the sugar cane. So in all those areas you can't use this process, but there are many areas where the ag waste is just sitting and rotting, and I'll get into this on Friday, but that makes methane gas, which is a worse greenhouse gas than the stuff we're emitting by doing that nasty process in the oil drum, so that we're doing the environment a credit by not letting it rot and making something that is useful. That's not boiling, but it's pretty hot, so we're gonna go with it and see what happens. So you can see on the sheet the directions. There's a ratio for how much binder, or how much cassava to how much water to how many to an oil drum's worth of charcoal. And there's a bunch of different methods for using cassava. So the easiest is just grating it and dumping it. But that means you're using up all the food to cook with. So another option is to squeeze out the grated material. And you can do that with a cheesecloth, but it's pretty juicy, so you can see you do get some liquid out. But it's not a great rate because a lot of it is the meat. But anyway, so you can take those squeezings and just use that as your binder, and then save the meat to cook with. So, and you can make a really great cassava cake with the meat, among other things. So in terms of the ratio, the measurements are done in milliliters, which is a little ridiculous when you're in the field. And so the other rule of thumb is that a yucca about the size that I showed you is right for one oil drum, so fully grated. But if you're doing the squeeze method, then you need to use more cassava because you're getting a whole lot less out. And then so you put the cassava in, and then if you want to do it while it's boiling, because the starch goes through a transition. It's much like making candy. So you get your sugar hot enough, and then it gets into a caramel state. So we're getting to the caramel state of yucca. It can get kind of clumpy, so you want to stir it, and then once it's been boiling for a bit and stirring, you take it off, and hopefully what you have is not like consistency. Yucca is what you get tapioca from, so we're basically making a very unprocessed version of tapioca pudding. It doesn't taste nearly as good. Okay, so now we need to mix this with the charcoal. So there's a 5-gallon bucket that's gray on the table, if you can grab that. And then, so you can see most of this charcoal is well crushed. The diameter of charcoal that you're going for is bigger. This is it's not like is one of those classic measurements that everyone in the world can understand. This is one that you can only understand if you go to Trader Joe's, so it's on the opposite end of the useful spectrum. But wasabi covered pea. Okay. Yeah. So I'm eyeballing all these ratios because I've been doing this for a while, but this is the kind of thing that you do want to actually follow the directions. If there's not enough binder, it'll be pretty obvious. A little more, because it won't stick together. But if there's too much, it makes smoky briquettes, again, because it's uncarbonized material. And then it's really important before you start briquetting to make sure you mix everything in. It's sort of like making a cake, where if you have a bunch of flour left over at the end, that stinks. So you don't want any charcoal powder left over. Another thing to notice is that the binder now is really hot. I think we're probably good. And so if you mix this with your hand, and it's actually easier to mix by hand than with anything else, you'll burn your hand. And it's sort of like hot glue in that once it's on, it's really hard to get off. So those are my tips to you for making this more pleasant. So we have a few different designs of briquette press. So I'll talk about this more on Friday, but it's a really simple, nice device that you can basically make anywhere for about $2. So the way it works is it's 3 pieces, a bottom pusher piece, a cup, and then a top plunger. So you load the material into the cup, and you can just do that directly with your hand. you can put it in anything where this part can rest on something and this center part doesn't get pushed up. So we have these wood blocks, but you can usually find like a cement brick that will work, or put two pieces of table together or whatever. There's lots of options. And then can I have a hammer? And then you put the plunger on, you give it a few good whacks, and then you just pop this out on the side to make your briquette. The charcoal will build up right here, and so every so often you have to clean it off. You'll also notice as you're doing this that a lot of charcoal gets wasted, and so it's smart to actually do this on some sort of tarp or rice bag or something so you can capture the charcoal, and you usually waste enough charcoal to make a few briquettes, and it's painful to waste that charcoal. So once the briquettes are made, they need to dry in the sun for a few days, and then you can cook with them. However, if you want them to be really sturdy so that they can handle like being transported to market, they can kind of get crumbly. And so what you can do is, the next use for chicken wire is to make a basket like this that holds your briquettes, and then right before you put the lid on, you can throw this into the drum. And it's totally ridiculous, but you manage to do it and it works, so that these don't actually light on fire. They just get hot enough to, well, not just to dry, because you do have to dry them in the sun first, but then they get hot enough that the starch goes through yet another phase transition. So when you're thinking about making candy, it goes from like the caramel stage to the like hard candy stage. So you get to the hard candy stage and then you have hard briquettes. So if that's important to whoever's making them, like if you're making them for use at your house, it doesn't matter at all. If you're making them for use like to sell, then you probably want to do this stage. And you can make a bunch of these bags and just throw them in, but I just have one for show. So if people want to help though, but be like, before we take off this brick, we should get as much of the sand off as possible. There's actually this, which helps a lot, but you rarely have in the field. Yeah, you can do that.
I was like hugging it for like the whole hour.
Yep, so you can see that it's pretty well black. And when you break it apart, it's black on the inside. So nasty? Yeah.
It's not nasty. It's like Bernie.
Well, Bernie, yeah. So good job.
Sure.
When you were getting this out, what usually works well is to dump it on its side, being kind of careful that not too much falls out the bottom, and then you can sort of tip it and empty it into your rice bag, and then oftentimes you sort of have to reach in to scoop out the last bits, which is a little unpleasant, but not too bad. So actually, yeah, it would be good to do that now. Yeah, it would. So we need to get the rest of the sand off, and then we can do that.
I guess I'll let this happen.
It's easier if you just get it all off. All right, so that's pretty good. We're not looking for 0 particles of sand, just not too many.
So that way, you have to let the sand go inside. So we should tilt it over?
Yeah.
Wow. Do you have it over the hole?